I'm Michael Barenboim. I'm a musician and professor at the Barenboim-Said Akademie for violin and chamber music. That's it. I mean, there's two things here. There's the Academy and its development, and there's Edward. I think we can start with the Academy just very shortly. So the West-Eastern Divan Orchestra was created by my father, Daniel Barenboim, and Edward Said together as an orchestra that assembles musicians from the Middle East, right? So it involves Israelis, Palestinians, but also Syrians, Lebanese, Egyptians, etc., etc. One of the highlights of the orchestra's existence is the orchestra managed to play a concert in Ramallah in the West Bank, right? In 2005. It's completely unthinkable right now, but in 2005, it happened, right? And it happened, although it actually couldn't happen, it was difficult to do. It was almost impossible to organize, but it happened. This is a great, kind of great event. The Academy was created along the same principles. So the idea was to create a higher education institution for musicians from the Middle East, based on the same principles that my father and Edward Said kind of had for the West-Eastern Divan Orchestra, and to just implement them into a higher education system. That's why the Academy, next to the music studies, also has a humanities component. They also do history, literature, and philosophy. And so that's the Academy. Now, as to Edward's role, I mean, it's funny that you say this. Of course, like, people quote Edward Said. They even remember some lines, some sentences that he said. They don't actually they don't actually know anything more about Edward Said, and not about really what the principles that he stood for. And I always recommend people to read two things. Is to read The Question of Palestine. It's one of the most important books you can read. An essay he wrote, Permission to Narrate, that you can actually, it's on Google. Like, if you Google it, you can read it. Right? That he wrote in the wake of the 1982 Beirut summer 1982. I would always unless you want to also read his works on other many great things. But if you want to read two things, read those, especially The Question of Palestine. I think that's something where you will get, I think, a really, really clear and also full idea of what we are talking about. And you read The Question of Palestine, it's an old book. It's not recent, and yet all the topics are it's the same. It's the same issues that we talk about here now are there. It's all there. It's almost it's almost depressing in a way. You have a whole people that is being constantly erased from people's perception. And it's been happening for over 100 years. The Balfour Declaration is a great example. The people that are actually the protagonists get erased from the narration. They don't get mentioned. No one thinks of them, and no one considers that they might have interests too. And that's something that we all have to try to do something to change, because it's completely impossible. It's also the only group I can think of that where we are like this. I say we, not we, but just like where it's acceptable somehow to have a panel talk about the conflict in the Middle East and not involve the Palestinian. That are actually absolutely central to any thought about this whole area. They are the absolute center of it, and it's deemed acceptable to have talks and symposia and whatever about this topic and not involve Palestinians. This is something that we have to fight against every day. We have to make sure that this doesn't happen. And this is something that Edward Said was very strong on. That's why I'm saying permission to narrate. Always allow the people that can speak to the topic in the first pronoun. They have to speak. They are the ones who have to speak. I mean, I'm sitting here now. It's great, but 100 people like me, as wonderful as that may be, is not the replacement for someone who can speak in the first pronoun. It's just not the same thing. It's another perspective, which is very important. I think I can bring things to the table, but I cannot do this because it's not me. It's also not many other of my kind of colleagues or just friends that are also very active. Like, we have to take that part of Edward's legacy very seriously. Edward Said is an inspiration to many, but this is the one thing that for me just sticks the most is the insistence on, why don't we get to talk? Like, what is wrong with everyone that everyone talks about us, but no one lets us talk? I get up every morning. First thing I do, I look at my phone, I look at the news, how many hundreds of Palestinians have been killed today, how many hospitals destroyed, how many children, limbs amputated without anesthetic, how many people are starving. I mean, you name it, it goes on. How little humanitarian aid is let in, how many bombs are flying, how many tanks are rolling. I mean, Israeli bombs. I find it hard to understand how the demand for an immediate ceasefire is not a consensus in the German or in the Western world. It's something I still don't understand. Yeah. I was born in Paris, and France is known for it's kind of like generally a society that tends to oppose its leaders in very kind of energetic ways, which Germany isn't. In Germany, there isn't so much this culture of like going on the streets and protesting. Of course, it happens, but it happens much less. I mean, if you look at France, it's just like. But this is just an aside. The fact that people are unwilling to do anything about this, in each one in their small way or their own way. Everybody is different. Some people like can do more, and others can do less. But at the moment, we are seeing, as you said, 70% of the people oppose sending arms to Israel. And yet of these 70%, I mean, I don't know, a very small percentage is actually doing anything about it. I think there is an element of kind of generally like, we as Germans cannot say this. I cannot accept that. I don't understand this. I remember doing this TEDx interview in Berlin in early February where I said, that, Germany is responsible for the Holocaust. In a way, why involve the Palestinians into this if Germans have a guilty conscience? I'm a German too. It's not. I'm not counting myself out of this, but there's no reason for the Palestinians to suffer for something that the Germans did 70 or 80 years ago. Why are the Palestinians suffering from? It just doesn't make any sense. And that's why I find this idea that as a German you cannot say this, or say that you are against sending arms to Israel. Why not? I don't know. It just doesn't make any sense if you think about it longer than 20 seconds. So there is that fear, and there's the fear of status. It's not just losing your job, because most of these jobs are secure. It's more this kind of how will I be seen in my immediate circles? Will I be looked at strangely? This slight discomfort in my surroundings, kind of thing. But there is also, yes, a lack of information. I think that the 70% that say they're against it are people even that they might just be against this one thing because they've seen a mutilated child in Gaza and houses, and that's a human reaction that is perfectly not only understandable, it's just the only human reaction one can have. But that doesn't mean that they actually know enough about, well, not even just the history, but even just what's going on right now, because there's a very severe lack of information that I've been kind of in my free time just kind of monitoring on and off, just to see like things like just what I said, 200 people killed on a Saturday. I've not seen an article about it. I've not even seen a mention of it. I mean, I say I monitor it in my free time. I don't look at everything, but I did check. It's like I didn't find it. So those 70%. How do we get them to be active? How do we make them understand that it's your discomfort? I don't know how to say. I don't really care. That people might look at me strangely, or that some people don't speak to me anymore, or that all of these things are completely irrelevant in the face of this. There's just kinds of priorities here. But we have to find ways to get people to be more active, especially if they already see the reprehensible nature of what is happening, and it's only about not only disagreeing with the government, but actually doing something I don't know, write your MP, for example. Just write your MP. Will they answer? Of course not. But if many people write their MPs, at some point the MP might get slightly annoyed. It's worth something, or write a Leserbrief, things like this. Just do something in whatever capacity you can, and that contribution will be worth something. I don't think we should be denigrating any even small contribution. We should support that. We should help people understand how important it is that each one does something. I was, like many people, very late to the party. I started appearing on this topic in January 2024. My main motivation was that I was very upset by how Palestinians are portrayed in the media, but also at how such incredible destruction of life can be justified. That was basically those two things. Yeah, I began in January 2024, often in radio interviews that were cultural programs, because as a musician, those are the kind of formats I appear in. And the very first time I really spoke in a clear manner, I would say, was actually really early in January 2024 on the topic of the city of Berlin had considered introducing what they called Antisemitismusklausel, a clause on anti-Semitism that would kind of ban any form of anti-Semitic narratives in cultural institutions. It's a kind of precursor to what later would be discussed and then passed by the federal government, by the parliament. Sorry. So I signed an open letter against this because it's, as I think has been widely shared, I think this has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. It has everything to do with the silencing of pro-Palestinian voices and Palestinians in particular. So I signed an open letter against it. My name was recognized on the open letter. I was asked for an interview, and in this interview was for the first time. I was very inept, very nervous. I didn't know how to express really what I wanted to say, but I tried, right? And from this came the next and the next and the next. Another thing that I always tried to do in these particular formats, which are not political formats. These are culture formats, right? I tried to always bring people's attention to Palestine and Gaza. So yes, it's important to talk about the cultural scene in Germany, the repression of pro-Palestinian voices. It's important, and I have done so numerous times in the past months, definitely, but also generally. But we should never lose sight of what we are actually talking about. Why these voices are being cancelled, which is devastating violence in Gaza and also in the West Bank. And I think that we should never lose sight of what we are actually all fighting for, which is justice and humanity, if you like, in two very simple terms. It's not very complicated. And that was kind of my main motivation.
Wir reden hier von einem der großen Verbrechen unserer Zeit. Und ich glaube, dass die Studierenden verstehen, wie wichtig das ist. Ich glaube, es ist auch vielleicht dann doch wichtig, unabhängig jetzt vom Thema, das sind junge, intelligente Menschen, ja, die sorgen sich um die Zukunft. Sie sorgen sich um die Zukunft auf der ganzen Welt. Und sie wollen eben, dass Menschenrechte für alle gelten, auch für Palästinenser. Sie wollen internationales Recht respektiert sehen, von allen. Und dass das keine Ausnahmen gibt. Das ist eine Welt, in der sie groß werden wollen. Sie wollen nicht in einer Welt groß werden, wo es doch was ausmacht, woher der oder derjenige kommt. Oder das eine Kriegsverbrechen ist in Ordnung, weil es von dem einen Staat begangen wird und von dem anderen nicht und so weiter. Sie wollen eine Welt des Rechts erleben. Und das verstehe ich.
I'm also, or I was and still am, a supporter of the student protests. And I signed that open letter in May that was in support of the student protest at the FU. A letter which I keep saying this, I was one of the only people that signed it, although I thought it was actually too weak. I felt like this argument of saying we're going to focus on their right to protest, but not focus on why they're protesting. I find this a little strange, honestly, but I still signed it because I think it's still better than not doing anything, right? And that led to me also giving more interviews about the fact that Palestinians and their supporters in Germany, and only them, are excluded from the kind of liberal freedom of expression, freedom of movement, freedom of everything discourse, which led me to appear at this first Bundespressekonferenz on this topic, where I spoke about, and this was again important, like I spoke about Gaza.
Gaza ist nunmehr komplett unbewohnbar geworden, so mehrere UN-Berichte. Es ist in diesem Klima, dass Studierende sich zusammengetan haben, um zu protestieren gegen eines der großen Verbrechen unserer Zeit. Unter ihnen auch viele Jüdinnen und Juden, die den 7. Oktober als traumatisches Ereignis verarbeiten mussten. Sie wollen in einer Welt leben, in der die Menschenrechte für alle gelten, und zwar auch für Palästinenser, wo das internationale Recht nicht einfach ignoriert werden kann, wie im Falle der UN-Resolution 2728 vom 25. März 2024, die einen sofortigen Waffenstillstand forderte. Sie wollen das Ende einer brutalen, illegalen Besatzung, die Palästinensern jeden Tag aufs Neue ihre Rechte gewaltsam wegnimmt. Palästinenser haben schließlich auch das Recht auf Selbstbestimmung. Auch dieses Recht wird ihnen jeden Tag aufs Neue gewaltsam weggenommen. Für mich steht fest, die Studierenden haben nicht nur das Recht zu protestieren, sondern sie haben Recht zu protestieren.
I spoke about the student protests, but I spoke about what the students are protesting against or protesting for, actually, and not just about their right to protest. So that's why I ended with the sentence that is saying that they have not only a right to protest, but they are right to protest. It's about Gaza. It's about Palestine, right? And that's something that I just kept, I kept just trying to insist on, like, not letting this disappear from the news. It has a tendency to disappear from the news. It's made to disappear from the news because there is I suspect a huge discomfort in large parts of German society with Germany's complicity. And of course, news of 200 people at least being killed on one day, like last Saturday, that kind of thing doesn't even show up in German news. It's 200 people. I mean, it's just because it's in Gaza, they don't report on it. If it happened anywhere else, with Germany's role being what it is, I think that's something that is newsworthy. And so I find it important that we keep this on people's minds. We keep it really present in people's minds. And yes, that's why also I was part of a team of co-initiators of an open letter to the German government that was titled "Germany must stop supporting the annihilation of Palestinians," that we sent to the German government and are still waiting for a reply. And since that moment, we also we're initiating other kind of actions, like this Bundespressekonferenz from last week, where we spoke. I mean, the title was about the arrest warrants of the ICC and Germany's role, but we spoke about, why is this all happening? We spoke about Gaza, we spoke about the destruction of the universities, of the hospitals, of the schools, etc. We spoke about starvation as a tool of war. We spoke about all these, the testimonies of doctors that go to work in Gaza that have testified that they've seen repeatedly small children being shot in the head and in the chest, things like this. We did share all of this in that press conference because it's important. Again, it's not that we don't lose sight of what we are actually talking about here. So yeah, that's the long version of the story. I say I was late to the party because, of course, we are seeing now an acceleration of something that is decades old. Especially if you look at Palestinians in Gaza, they have been completely forgotten until October 2023. They have been completely forgotten. They were under blockade since 2007, I think, living in conditions that that Human Rights Watch calls an open-air prison. I mean, that's not a term that you just throw around like this. They were locked in this space, which is, I think, slightly smaller than East Berlin, right? 2.2 million people, okay, and with barely enough resources to survive. So and politics of blockade means that everything that's let in or goes out is controlled by Israel, right? And things like things were not let in because of supposed dual use. So they could be used for civilian purposes or military purposes. They used that justification for anything. They used that justification for dates or for tents. They used that justification for tents according to a Guardian article because the tents were green, and green is a military color. It sounds now a bit ridiculous, but this is the reality of life in Gaza for the past decades is so harrowing and so terrible. And we all have a large responsibility in having let this happen. It's not just those assaults on Gaza, the assault of 2008, 2009, the assault of 2014, the assault of 2021. There's many, what some Israeli politicians would call mowing the lawn, which is in the terminology is already deeply disturbing, right? So we're all in some ways, and I really count myself in this. I regret this very much that we have let this happen and completely let them just basically live in these conditions, survive barely in these conditions without giving them our attention in the ways that we should have. If you want, my real aha moment is actually, it's not, I keep mentioning this in most of the kind of press appearances I do, is really 9th of October 2023, former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant says, no fuel, no electricity, no water, no food. These are human animals, and we will act accordingly. There's a reason I know this by heart, because I think that human animals, it's like something that just brings back the worst memories. I always think of Rwanda, the genocide in Rwanda 20 years ago, where there was talk of cockroaches, right? It's that kind of dehumanization of a whole group that allows this kind of thing to happen. So that for me was, I saw this, and I saw basically the whole German state apparatus behind an Israeli, in front of an Israeli flag. And this, to me, was completely unacceptable. Honestly, it's not that I don't understand some kind of like thing about the Germany's role. It's just, it's unacceptable to me, regardless of what one may think of anything else. It's unacceptable to me to give one's complete and total support to a government that calls the people, a whole group of people, of Palestinians in Gaza, human animals. That was my first kind of, okay, guys, how is this possible? How are we doing this? How is also the rest of the Western world? But human animals, again, human animals is something that is just stuck with me, right? And then, the following kind of course, the actions, it's not just what you say, it's then what you do. And we have, warnings of scholars, genocide experts on the 15th of October, November, warnings from the UN, etc. We have the ICJ in January. We have all these moments where there is a clear warning of a danger of genocide, where all states, not just Germany, have a responsibility to act, to prevent, right? That's the Geneva Conventions, which, let's not forget, are created because of Germany's role in the 30s and 40s, right? So I see every day pictures from Gaza. Every day I wake up with them, I go to sleep with them, they're on my mind during the day, I see them during the day. I think we all do, right? It's just these horrifying images. I see this, and I still am unwilling to accept that there is any justification for this. I cannot accept that. That's why I don't really understand. I work in culture and academia, right? So I'm a musician, artist, but I also, a professor at the academy, at the Barenboim-Said Akademie. And in both of these fields, I have a feeling there's a certain sense of, there's nothing we can really do about this. B, it's complicated, which again, it's not particularly complicated, right? And C, yes, if I say something, I'm afraid for my career, I'm afraid for my social network, I'm afraid for that. And I think all of these reasons, in a way, maybe on an individual level, I can understand, but like at some point, you cannot accept working, especially if you work in Germany, you know, like you just accept that the government willingly and knowingly, you know, supports this insane destruction of a whole people and of a whole place, you know, making surviving an absolute impossibility. I mean, we have to be aware of this. I tend to be very negative because I tend to look at the way things are. At least I think so. I mean, Gaza is destroyed. Gaza is gone. There is no. They have completely obliterated any chance of survival in that area. You know, you have genocidal language. There are instances. I mean, hundreds of instances. There's the human animals is the most famous, but you know, there's Prime Minister Netanyahu's invoking Amalek. You know, there's the President Herzog saying that there are no civilians in Gaza. All of this was in October 2023, and they kept going. You know, they wanted hell, they're going to get hell. You know, all these quotes that we've all learned to know in a very gruesome way. And then you have countless videos of soldiers that are celebrating their actions, you know, and you have the result. All of this is causally linked, in my opinion. That's why South Africa brought Israel to the ICJ, because there is a causal link between, you know, human animals, hell on earth, etc., soldiers celebrating their actions, and the highest number of amputees and children in the world, related to the population. I mean, all of these things are linked. But to answer your question, why people are afraid still, I don't really understand. Especially people that have kind of secure contracts. This is something I just can't. I don't get. I don't get it. Like the people we in our kind of, you know, let's say in our field that want to do something, tend to generally be in precarious living situations and or in precarious contracts. And the ones that have a certain amount of security are very silent. And I find this very strange. I find this extremely strange, and I don't know why this is. One of the main things that I keep wanting to do is to put Palestinians at the center of the stage. So if we do charity concerts, like in the artist collective that I'm part of called Make Freedom Ring, I always insist that there are Palestinians on stage. It's easy to do a classical music concert, even for a great cause, you know, like, you know, so collecting money for charities that support children in Gaza, for example, or just people in Gaza, which we do on a regular basis. And it's very easy to do that and not involve a single Palestinian musician. But there's something that I find deeply disturbing about the erasure of Palestinian voices that actually contributes to many of the problems that we have here, is that we don't see Palestinians as anything beyond either terrorists or victims of violence, which, you know, of course, this is of course very important. That's why I say we are talking about Gaza and the West Bank. We have to start thinking of Palestinians as more than this. We have to put them at the center of them in terms of their artistic brilliance or their academic output or their creativity, whatever it is that the people, that whatever projects we do, we have to always remember, you know, that they are the protagonists, and my role is to enable the protagonists to be protagonists, but it cannot be that I take a slot away. You know, that is so in these concerts, for example, I always try to make sure that enough musical numbers have Palestinian musicians in them, right? That's just a very simple kind of way to do this. With a colleague of mine, Taim Khlefi, that I work with, we've started a talk series called Kilme, that once a month we invite a Palestinian academic, artist, intellectual, and we speak to them. And we speak to them in a way that they can present themselves in the way that they want, because that's another thing. It's that if you want to amplify Palestinian voices, it's important to let these people speak the way they want, because a lot of the time, when they're not totally erased, and there is one of them in a panel or something, there are constraints put on them that don't allow them to express themselves. And I think it's important. It's important to not allow this to happen. is to always amplify Palestinian voices here in Germany and generally everywhere that we operate, so that we always have a clear idea of who the protagonists really are. Yeah, I mean, as I said, I tend to have a very negative outlook on things. This feeling of being depleted when you fight for something so vehemently and so strongly is completely understandable. I have down days too. Everyone has a down day, you know. Like at the end of the day, I always try to remind myself, even on a down day, you know, there's one thing is being depleted because you're fighting for something that is a worthy cause, and then at the same time you think of the people that are actually affected. You know, you being depleted or me being depleted is not really, it's not actually not really acceptable. Like, I mean, of course, we have to take care of ourselves. It's not, you know, we have to make sure that we can do this for a long time. So we can't completely burn out. We can't we can't allow ourselves to kind of like, but we should also not think that we can just take a break. There is no break, you know. Genocidal violence doesn't have a break. It doesn't stop. If it stopped, you know, we would all be happy, but it doesn't. Yes, we have to take care of our you know, health. I think we have a moral responsibility, even on a down day, even on days that are difficult, you know, and even like, you know, even when it means, you know, kind of getting over your own, like, really, getting over your own, like, really terrible feelings and terrible situation. Like, even in those days, I mean, if we take the responsibility of being active, of wanting to do something, then we have to do it to the end. We have to do it 100%, and we have to keep doing it, because again, there is no break. It doesn't stop. So if it doesn't stop, then we should not stop. When it stops, we can you know, maybe take a day off or something. But like this, I've heard this already a few times, where I get kind of surprised by this. Yeah, I need a break from, like, Palestine. Okay. They don't get a break. Why do you get a break? What are you talking about? You know, like, if you want a break, then, you know, then it's okay. Not everyone has to be super active all the time. Again, like, every little contribution is worth something. But just to, like, it's to get this thing, we are not at the center of we are not the protagonists. We are here to do our bit to change a situation that is intolerable. But the protagonists are not us. And so we have to adapt, in a way. We have to adapt to the severity of the situation. We can be aware when we have a situation of privilege. I count myself very privileged for many reasons. You know, I work in a wonderful institution. I have a career as a concert soloist. In many ways, I can count myself extremely lucky. This acknowledging that and understanding that is really a part of also assessing how active one can be, and you know, how much one can put into this kind of activity. And I think a lot of people don't understand how lucky they are in their situation, and how much they could actually spare. I say spare quite willfully, because it's really the time that you would have that would otherwise be free time, you know. So at least spare that. You know, you don't have to go to the lengths that I go to, where I do this almost 24/7. And I'm not saying you have to do that. You know, like, not everyone has to be like this. But people with a great amount of privilege, you know, if they're only aware of this privilege and aware of the luck of the luck of being in this situation, and just, you know, with that in mind, you can be very active then. Yeah. I think that's mainly the point. Yeah.